It was 2 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang inside the presidential residence in Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré opened his eyes to a call that would not only disturb his sleep, but would shake the very foundation of his nation's sovereignty. Minutes later, special forces were already moving through the shadows toward a building disguised as a warehouse for medical aid. Its concrete walls bore the marks of neglect, yet the perimeter was guarded like a nuclear facility. Why would a place meant to store donated medicine demand such secrecy? When the steel doors fell open, the truth was more chilling than fiction. Row after row of humming freezers revealed more than 8,000 biological samples. Blood, marrow, and tissue drawn from ordinary Burkinabe citizens. Beside them stood cages of genetically altered animals, their movements echoing like whispers in the dark. And hidden in a sealed compartment lay contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with one clause etched in cold ink. All genetic data shall be the property of the sponsor. Was this humanitarian research or a harvest of human life? For centuries, Africa has seen its minerals, crops, and even its people taken under the banner of progress. But what happens when the very lifeblood of a nation, its DNA, is marked as property for someone else's gain? A truck of gold leaving a starving village is one kind of theft. Vials of marrow leaving a hospital ward reveal something far more intimate: the theft of existence itself. True sovereignty is not measured only in borders, armies, or constitutions. It lives in the veins of a people, in the codes that shape who they are. If a nation cannot protect that, then what remains of its independence? And so, the question that confronts us is not merely what Burkina Faso discovered that night, but what it means for Africa's future. Can a small nation redefine the rules of global science, or will it be crushed for daring to defend its own humanity? Stay with us, because this is more than a story about laboratories and contracts. This is about dignity, survival, and a continent deciding whether its future will be owned or defended. If you believe the truth deserves to be heard beyond the headlines, subscribe and share this story. And before we go deeper, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? The truth did not emerge in a single night. It began quietly, with missing numbers buried inside routine health reports. For 18 consecutive months, Burkina Faso's public health system recorded the launch of a free medical screening program. On paper, more than 2,000 citizens in remote provinces were tested. Most of them were subsistence farmers and low-income workers. Yet the files ended at the first visit. No follow-up, no results delivered, just silence. Families remembered the same sequence. Teams of medical workers, many of them foreign, arrived in their villages with interpreters and papers stamped with official-looking seals. The forms asked for consent to provide blood samples, tissue swabs, even bone marrow, all under the promise of helping future generations. Who could refuse such a request when told it might save lives? But once the samples were taken, the teams vanished. Letters went unanswered. No doctor returned. If the aim was health, why abandon the very people who had given their bodies in trust? The first alarm did not come from the Ministry of Health. It arrived through the military's medical corps. An internal audit discovered shipment codes connected to the samples, codes that matched cargo flights leaving Ouagadougou International Airport. None of them were bound for local research centers. None were registered in official medical channels. Someone had authorized the export of human material under the label of non-infectious research goods. President Traoré received the classified report in his own hands. His instructions to the military doctors were simple but firm. Trace the chain from the needle to the cargo bay. Every step, every name, every departure. What began as a medical concern turned overnight into a counterintelligence mission. Plainclothes officers infiltrated clinics. They collected testimonies from villagers, copied patient logs, and followed trucks leaving rural health posts. In Ouagadougou, a farmer remembered being asked for 3 extra vials of blood for research in the capital. In Banfora, a mother described how her young son was sampled twice in 1 week without explanation. In Fina, a nurse admitted she was paid cash to hand over sealed containers without writing them into the official registry. Were these irregular mistakes or signs of a system designed to harvest at scale? As evidence mounted, the investigators marked each location with pins on a wall map. Lines connected provinces to a single destination on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, the Sahel Biomedical Research Center. To the public, it was introduced as an innovation hub funded by international aid. To the investigators, the financial trail told a different story. The Ministry of Finance uncovered transfers worth millions of dollars. Instead of coming directly from donor governments, the money passed through shell companies in Luxembourg, Toronto, and a Caribbean tax haven before arriving in Burkina Faso. Each transaction coincided with the arrival of foreign technical teams. Their departures lined up with outbound shipments of biological cargo. The pattern was too precise to dismiss. Then came the most chilling discovery. Hidden among the documents seized by covert operatives were draft contracts between the center and multinational pharmaceutical firms. The text declared in unambiguous terms, all genetic material collected was to be the property of the funding entity, not the patients, not the state, the sponsor. This was not aid. This was extraction. Just as gold and oil had once been claimed under foreign concessions, now it was DNA being marked for ownership. Traoré's advisors debated quietly behind closed doors. Was it possible that a small country in West Africa had become the testing ground for a new form of exploitation, one where the body itself became a commodity? The president's decision was immediate. This could not be handled through routine bureaucracy. The investigation would remain secret until every link in the chain could be locked at once. No premature leaks, no partial arrests, only a strike that would capture the entire apparatus and place undeniable evidence in state hands. What the world saw as a health project was, in reality, the preparation for an unprecedented counterintelligence operation. A country long underestimated was about to test whether sovereignty could be defended not only at its borders, but also in its blood. And now, the question for us becomes urgent. If this is what was discovered in Burkina Faso, what else might lie hidden in research centers across Africa, Asia, or even your own city? If you are watching this from Nairobi, New York, or Johannesburg, comment below. Do you believe a nation has the right to defend its DNA the same way it defends its land and its children? At 5:17 in the morning, the command was given. The city of Ouagadougou was still wrapped in sleep, but around the Sahel Biomedical Research Center, the night had already changed. Unmarked vehicles slid into position. Drones hovered in the dawn haze. Roadblocks appeared suddenly, cutting off every approach. In the operations room, President Ibrahim Traoré leaned over a live feed. His voice was measured. "Lock it down. No exit. No shipment. Nothing leaves this ground." The strike was swift. At the rear gate, SUVs blocked the service road. At the front, soldiers advanced in silence. Guards who had grown used to routine suddenly faced an authority they could not question. Doors gave way, and inside, the truth unfolded in plain sight. Freezers packed with blood and marrow samples, canisters marked with patient codes, server rooms filled with blinking drives. Each discovery added weight to the silence. The most dramatic moment came in an office near the administrative wing. Behind a locked door sat a man with a Ministry of Health badge. He looked directly at Traoré and spoke without fear. "I know why you are here." The president's reply was steady. "Then you know you are under arrest." The betrayal was no longer rumor. It was flesh and blood, captured within the very institution sworn to protect the nation. By 9:15 in the morning, the compound was secure. Evidence was cataloged with precision. Refrigerated trucks carried seized materials under escort. In one container, hard drives sealed in anti-static bags. In another, cryogenic units still humming with preserved marrow. 17 foreign nationals were detained. 5 Burkinabe collaborators arrested, and the facility itself placed under state control. The convoy reached the presidential compound as the city stirred to daylight. Traoré stood at the unloading bay, his words calm but unyielding. "We will not accuse. We will prove." 2 days later, under the Ethiopian sun, the African Union Assembly gathered. Delegates expected debate. What they received was evidence. Traoré placed a leather folder on the podium and opened it. Photographs of cryogenic tanks, copies of contracts with pharmaceutical corporations, shipping manifests pointing to laboratories far from Africa. His declaration was blunt. Genetic material taken without informed consent is already harm. We call it by its name. Then came the line that froze the chamber. Burkina Faso had formally requested the International Criminal Court to open a case for crimes against humanity. The hall fell into tense silence. Filing such a request meant not just resistance, but confrontation with the global order. Across the continent, radio stations replayed his words. In Johannesburg, students raised banners reading, "Our DNA is not for sale." In Bamako, traders debated the meaning of sovereignty, not in gold or land, but in blood. In Bissau, an old woman told a reporter, "For once, Africa is not asking permission to defend itself." In the West, the reaction was sharper. Editorials described the move as reckless. Commentators warned that Burkina Faso risked isolation. Economists spoke of sanctions, cuts in aid, and scientific boycotts. Yet the more the warnings grew, the more ordinary Africans embraced a new phrase whispered in markets and campuses alike: the DNA shield. The raid had exposed more than a facility. It had revealed the fragile line between research and exploitation, between aid and control. A small nation, often overlooked, had forced the world to see that sovereignty in the 21st century is written not only in borders, but also in the genetic code of its people. And the questions now spread far beyond Ouagadougou. If this could happen in Burkina Faso, what might be hidden in laboratories elsewhere? Could the shield of one nation become the shield of a continent? For those of us watching, the reflection is personal. If your child's DNA were treated as property, would you remain silent? Or would you demand protection as fiercely as you would demand freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a people's genetic identity belongs to them or to those who can afford to fund the research? The raid ended with evidence, but evidence alone could not guard a nation's future. Within days of returning from Addis Ababa, President Ibrahim Traoré convened his cabinet inside the council chamber of the presidential palace. Stacks of legal drafts lay across the polished table. His message was clear. Burkina Faso could not rely on outrage abroad. The country needed laws strong enough to make every attempt at exploitation a criminal act. The Justice Minister presented a document stamped, "Draft Act, National Biological Sovereignty." Its language was precise. All biological data and genetic material collected within Burkina Faso were to be declared the sole property of the state. No foreign entity, whether public, private, or academic, could claim ownership. Any attempt to transfer or export samples without authorization would be classified as theft under criminal law. The clauses extended to all sectors, from rural health posts to national universities. The proposal passed through the National Assembly in a single week. When the vote was tallied, the result was overwhelming. Burkina Faso became the first nation on the continent to enshrine genetic sovereignty into law. Newspapers in Ouagadougou called it bold. Foreign outlets labeled it dangerous. But inside the country, citizens saw it as a shield drawn in red dust, a line no outsider was allowed to cross. The legal change was only the beginning. Traoré turned next to capacity. A law without infrastructure would remain a hollow promise. Plans were unveiled for the Burkina Faso Institute of Biomedical Research, fully state-owned and funded from the national budget. The first equipment to arrive did not come from international donors, but from the seized stockpiles of the Sahel Biomedical Research Center. Rows of centrifuges, sequencing machines, and biosafety cabinets were cataloged by military technicians before being transferred to the new facility. For the first time, Burkinabe scientists would work with the tools once used against their own people. Construction began quickly. On the outskirts of Ouagadougou, locals gathered along fences to watch cranes lifting steel frames into the sky. Farmers, market traders, and students stood side by side, whispering about the day Burkina Faso might produce its own vaccines. In classrooms, teachers used the new law as a lesson. Children repeated a phrase they had never heard before: genetic sovereignty. It was more than a policy. It was a seed planted in the national consciousness. The impact reached families who had once felt abandoned. Villagers who remembered signing consent papers with no return visit now knew their samples had been retrieved and secured. Mothers who had watched foreign doctors take blood from their children were told that never again would such acts go unregulated. The sense of betrayal was slowly replaced by pride, not because the scars had healed, but because a boundary had been drawn that acknowledged the pain. Beyond Burkina Faso, the consequences rippled. In Mali, radio talk shows debated whether their government should pass similar laws. In Ghana, parliamentarians cited the Burkinabe model while calling for an audit of foreign-funded laboratories. In Nigeria, student groups organized forums on DNA sovereignty. What began as a single national decision threatened to become a continental movement. Yet with pride came new anxieties. Diplomats warned of potential aid cuts. Traders whispered about retaliation from powerful nations whose companies had lost access to valuable data. Economists wondered if sanctions might follow. The risk was real, but for many Burkinabe, dignity outweighed fear. As one farmer in Banfora told a reporter, "We lived without electricity, without roads, and without foreign aid before. What we cannot live without is our own humanity." The transformation was not only legal or infrastructural, it was psychological. For decades, Africans had been told their development depended on outside assistance. Now, a young nation had declared that even in science, sovereignty mattered more than dependency. In Ouagadougou's markets, conversations once filled with complaints about poverty turned instead to debates about law, justice, and the meaning of independence. In an age where data is more valuable than gold, the consequences of one raid had grown into something larger. A people who once saw themselves as passive subjects of aid now saw themselves as guardians of their own future. Sovereignty was no longer an abstract word. It was a lived experience, written into law, reinforced by institutions, and carried in the voices of ordinary citizens. And so the question spread beyond Burkina Faso. If one country can defend its DNA, what will happen when an entire continent does the same? If you are watching this from Detroit, Nairobi, or Accra, imagine the same law protecting you and your family. Would you support it? Comment, "It is time," if you believe every nation has the right to guard the genetic lifeblood of its people. When news of the raid and the new biological sovereignty law reached Western capitals, the reactions were swift and uneasy. In Washington, analysts warned that Burkina Faso's decision would set a precedent other nations might follow. Reports circulated that research collaborations could be disrupted, pharmaceutical companies might lose access to crucial data, and aid relationships could be reevaluated. Editorials in major newspapers described the law as biological isolationism, a phrase meant to frame self-defense as defiance. In Europe, the mood was divided. Some officials argued that stricter transparency in medical research was long overdue, while others feared the Burkinabe move would embolden critics of international aid. Meanwhile, human rights organizations quietly acknowledged the uncomfortable truth. Consent forms signed by illiterate villagers under the weight of foreign authority could never be considered genuine consent. The debate spilled into public forums. Was Burkina Faso obstructing progress, or was it finally forcing the world to face its own hypocrisy? Across Africa, however, the narrative was different. Radio hosts in Ghana and Mali spoke of the DNA shield with admiration. University students in Nigeria debated how a continent could reclaim control of its scientific destiny. In South Africa, banners at rallies read, "Sovereignty is not isolation, it is survival." The message was clear. One country's decision had cracked open a conversation that had long been silenced. For Americans watching from afar, the questions carried echoes of history. In the 20th century, the United States defended its access to oil as if it were a matter of national security. Military doctrines, foreign policy, and entire wars were shaped by the belief that energy was life. If that was true for oil, can Africans not say the same about DNA? If sovereignty meant protecting resources beneath the ground, why should it not include the code within their blood? This is where reflection becomes personal. Many Americans over 60 lived through the Cold War, the oil shocks of the 1970s, and debates over who controlled the world's resources. You know what it means when global systems are shaken. The question now is whether the 21st century will see Africa rise not as a victim of resource extraction, but as a defender of a new kind of sovereignty. The world order is shifting, not only with armies or markets, but with the understanding that human identity itself is not for sale. And if a small nation like Burkina Faso can make this stand, what does it say about the larger powers who have yet to act? So consider this. If it were your family's DNA leaving under foreign contracts, would you accept the explanation of aid? Or would you demand that your government draw the same red line? If you have witnessed history before, then you know this moment matters. Comment with your thoughts below. Do you believe Africa is setting an example the world must follow? From a phone call in the early hours of the morning to a law passed in the heart of the capital, Burkina Faso's journey was more than an investigation. It was the transformation of betrayal into resistance, of secrecy into sovereignty. What began as a warehouse raid ended as the birth of a doctrine, the belief that no strand of DNA, no drop of blood, no fragment of identity can be claimed by outsiders. But this story is not only about one president or one country. It speaks to a wider truth. Sovereignty in the modern world is no longer measured solely by borders or armies. It is written in the invisible codes of life itself. To protect those codes is to defend the essence of a people. To surrender them is to risk losing more than land or gold, but the very memory of who we are. There is a lesson here, simple yet profound. Independence is not given by treaties. It is not secured by foreign aid. It is built each time a nation decides to guard what others assume they can take. The people of Burkina Faso were told their samples were for research, for progress, for health. They later discovered they were for profit. The moral is clear. Trust without transparency is not partnership. It is exploitation in disguise. Yet this moment also carries a warning. If vigilance fades, the old practices will return. The names of companies may change, the forms may look more polished, but the intent will remain the same. If a continent forgets this lesson, its future could once again be harvested in silence. So the reflection comes back to you. What does this mean for your children and grandchildren? Will they remember this as the time Africa refused to be silent, or as the moment the world ignored a warning that was written plainly in evidence and testimony? Your voice matters here. Comment with your conviction. Share this story so that the truth does not remain locked in conference halls, but reaches households, classrooms, and communities. Subscribe if you believe that sovereignty is not a theory but a practice, and that every nation deserves the right to defend its lifeblood. Because this is not only a broadcast, it is a beginning. They took gold, they took oil, they tried to take DNA, but they cannot take the will of a people who have decided to rise. This is Burkina Faso's shield. This is Africa's awakening. And, perhaps, if we choose to listen, it is the world's reminder that human dignity is not a commodity.